here's the interesting thing about this is kind of my bread and butter, right? This is what I do for a living, essentially, what you're talking about, which is people don't understand that what makes a relationship good is not what makes the sexual attraction good.
Hello and warm welcome to the Stories We Tell. I'm Nithya Shanti, a teacher and facilitator of conscious living here at Round Glass. In this show, we share the gift of illuminating stories. Last week, you heard the story of Michaela Boehm, whose best friend and business partner, James, lost his life in 2011. James went missing in the California desert on the anniversary of his own father's death. Michaela assisted in a search for her friend and had to deal with the intense grief of losing a loved one. In addition to the wisdom of Michaela's story, I wanted to learn more about her work as a relationship therapist. Here's my conversation with her. Michaela, I want to tap into your understanding of intimacy and sexuality, and let's find a way to connect that also with what we're discussing. How is the journey of a really deep connection with another human being, including a physical connection, how is that supporting us in living a life that's more whole, where even loss is a part of that? Can you tell us your understanding of that?
Yeah, you touched on this a bit earlier when you were saying about your friend who said that every grief has to be, lived. And when you really feel into it, the act of loving someone, right, and the act of connecting your life with someone holds in it the loss of that love, right? And it doesn't have to be that they are leaving you or you are leaving them. Somebody will die before the other, right? Or you will both go, or you will lose a child, or all the things that we love the most in the interpersonal space come with that feeling of the loss, which is why the falling in love and the being in love and then the loving, which is a different thing altogether, right? The actual sustainable relating to a human is bittersweet, and there is a loss and a grief in the love, and a lot of people don't want to feel that, and so they don't let themselves have that depth of connection and that depth of intimacy, because that intimacy carries that grief and carries that loss, amongst other things, of course. So the getting with our mortality and getting with the understanding that all things will end actually makes your relationship much deeper and allows you to actually be with that person. And you don't have to defend against the loss by never actually being with them. And so when we teach, we always talk about that intimacy essentially starts with being connected to one's own feelings and to one's own body. And that when you are intimate with your own feelings and sensations and thoughts, you can be intimate with someone else because you feel their body through your body, you feel their being through your being, and then you don't see them as you already see them. You can see them fresh, right? It's a fresh moment every moment. And then you have actual intimacy with the moment and not with some idea of that person. And then, of course, when you look at sex, I'm not only talking intercourse, but the play between two people, right? The erotic, friction is how we sometimes call it. The erotic friction between two people becomes more than just the lust aspect. It becomes the play of two people animating these realms of creation and loss and creation and loss, and there is something very beautiful that then also is reflected in one's spiritual practice, right? The being two and becoming one, and then pulling back apart so you can experience oneness, which you can't experience unless you have experienced separation, right? And so two people in that kind of a dance actually animate the entire universe, so to speak, in their relationship. And that, I think, is a worthwhile, not easy, but worthwhile endeavor.
Why have you described it in such a powerful, poetic, and beautiful way? Then why is it that so many spiritual traditions have really encouraged people to abstain from this or limit this to just procreation? And including the Buddhist tradition I was part of. This is just seen as a distraction. This is just seen as okay, like you said, it's just lust, and we have to go beyond this. Mm-hmm. Not that all Buddhism is like that. Of course, there are tantric forms of Buddhism which do include this. But my larger question is that just a kind of way of controlling people, or is that coming from a masculine perspective on spirituality? Let's just get over. Let's just transcend this. I'd love your insight on this.
Well, I think it's multi-layered, right? So we can certainly always assume in all traditions that when you essentially control a human's deepest impulses and classify them as good or bad or whatever, you essentially assert control on that person, right? That's to be assumed, and that's not only in the big religions. That's how cults function, and that's how certain family systems function. But if we don't assume the kind of malevolence of that, right? If we don't assume the manipulation of that, we could all, which definitely is also there, right? But we could say that when your feeling is that you should just want to be with God, you just want to be in oneness, then of course it's pretty logical to cut out anything that keeps you from oneness. And anybody who's ever had a relationship knows that your partner definitely keeps you from oneness, right? You can test somebody's enlightenment very quickly by putting them in a relationship, right? So if we just assume that when we look at practitioners of old going, well, how do I get from A to B the quickest? Well, we could say, cut out all that stuff that causes, right? Eat very little, don't have anything to tend to that distracts you, sit in a cave somewhere in the forest or whatever, have a meal a day so you don't have to deal with even digestion, and then see how quickly you can get where you want to go, right? I mean, that's very efficient. It's a little bit reductionist, right? And it certainly doesn't take the enormous beauty and the poetic nature of the engagement with life into account. But I think there's many ways to get to God, and that's certainly one of them, right? Yeah. I personally think that each person can find their way, and for some people cutting out distractions is the right way to go, and for some people not paying that much attention to the body is the right way to go, and then for other people engaging in the full-bodied intimacy with life itself, including a partner, is a good way to go. I don't think one is better than the other. I just think you should be able to know all of them and then pick the one that suits you.
I would add, it's listening to you, I feel it's almost like a spiral, and it's like there are moments of inhaling and exhaling. So I think there are moments, and no matter how intimate and how much we love someone, we're like, okay, I just need my own space. I need to really be in my own energy field. I need to tune into myself, maybe for a day, maybe for a week, maybe for a year. I need to just take an in-breath. And then again, there's the out-breath. And I've noticed that in my life. Like, I actually did go on many of the things you described. I was actually eating one meal a day. I was actually living in a forest. I was actually living in caves as well. And for 6 years, I practiced like that. And it put me in touch with something really deep and in a way universal. And then when I came back to what we call our world, I was amazed at how naive or untrained I was in human love, and how I was just constantly putting my foot in my mouth, and I was constantly messing up, and I was being talking about awareness all the time, compassion all the time. I was actually not being very compassionate, not actually being very tuned into the person right in front of me. And that was a huge wake-up call for me, that here I am practicing this for years, and I think I'm reasonably good at it, but I haven't even begun. And so that was like for me, relationship was like a mirror. which showed me, like you said, you can test someone's enlightenment really quickly by putting them in a relationship. Or like Ram Dass used to say, go spend a weekend with your family. You'll know how enlightened you are. If you think you're enlightened, go spend a weekend with your family. So I think for me, it's connecting and stepping back, and connecting and stepping back. And I think this is, and whatever rhythm we find for ourselves, this perhaps might be a more complete approach to spirituality and life, which honors both.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's beautifully said. And you know that pulse is the pulse of all creation, right? Spanda, it's like it's that thing, right? It's in our heart, it's in our breath, it's in everything, it's in the universe. It's the ethers contracting and expanding, however you want to say it. And I think there's something very beautiful in there. How long an inhale or an exhale in the world is up, is, I think, up to a person's destiny and faith and whatever, right? But there has to be, you don't know it's dark if you've never seen light, and I think that it's just very beautiful.
Just to expand on what we've been talking about, that this journey is about stepping back and stepping in, stepping back and stepping in. Again, the in-breath and out-breath. It's stepping back into witnessing and just letting things be, and then stepping into it with all the confusion and all the highs and all the lows, and really being embodied. And to me, that spanda that you mentioned, that in and out, has really added much more dimension and depth to my understanding and practice. And I want to ask you about your book, and I love the title, The Wild Woman's Way. It would be a book that's not very familiar in the women's consciousness in India. It used to be, I think there was a time when women were really accepted for the fullness of who they are, but then there's this image of, this very poised and gentle and goddess-like and very proper woman. And so it's lovely for me to just read the title of your book. And anything you'd like to say to our listeners about what is the essence of what you're trying to share in this book?
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, so my original training is Jungian psychology. So one of my first loves was Jungian psychology, and the wild woman is a Jungian archetype. And it's actually not what you would think, fangs and being unpleasant or screaming or foaming at the mouth. What the wild is connected to the wild, connected to nature. And so connected to nature in a woman's body, of course, means connected to our cycles, to our rhythms, to that spanda in others, because we are, of course, in our bodies always connected to our children. And there's a coming back to our original nature that is implied in the wild woman. So it's not really about being unpleasant or loud or whatever. It's really about recognizing that our bodies are an incredible source of wisdom and power, and that when we can feel our body and sensitize to our body, and with that our heart and our emotions, the devotion that comes from that, when you were talking about the poised goddess-like, right, the devotion that comes from our heart being expressed through our body is incredibly beautiful. And it means the full range of emotions within that, of course. So when we talk about the wild woman, what we're talking about is coming back into the body, connecting to the rhythms of the body, connecting to the rhythms of nature, understanding how we fit into the bigger picture, and then how life can come through us, not only physical life like our children, but also just food and beauty and art and movement and just the fullness of our bodies and hearts. And that's really what the Wild Woman's Way is. And I wrote it specifically for women in a time where we are more and more essentially asked to be in front of computers and not connected, not on the ground, and not what we yearn to be. And so I think that when we know what we can do, then we can also do the other thing. It's not about a reductionistic coming back to just, cooking and cleaning. It's knowing that when you want to engage with your body, that takes a certain disposition and also a certain kind of awareness in the body. And when we want to go and work in the world, that takes a different kind of bodily awareness. And when we know that, we can shift back and forth. And so we can still have the parts of us that want to maybe have children or have a partner, have romantic lives, have pleasure, have beauty, and then we can go out into the world and do what needs to be done, knowing we can come back to ourselves.
I get it. It's so powerful, and now it makes so much more sense what you mean by the wild. I have two questions. One is a quick question, which I've been curious about for a long time. That for women, it's kind of obvious they have these menstrual cycles, and it affects their body, it affects their emotions. And I've always wondered that because ultimately all of nature is cycles. But as a man, I've not been able to very clearly discern a kind of a cycle. Maybe there is one, I just haven't noticed it. And I want to know, do men also have a cycle?
Men have different cycles. So one of the things that's very, and I'm sure you know this from your monk days, right? Circadian cycles. Our circadian rhythm is very important to things like testosterone, general health, in men and women alike. But often in men, you'll notice, like, for instance, I don't know if you've ever done that. Did you do dark meditations where you no longer have light? Did you do any of that, right?
I've done an 8-day.
Yeah, so you know what happens, right? You still have a rhythm. You might not, you still orient. There's still certain things happen. And so for a man, I think there's those cycles, right? The circadian cycles that can be really used for both things like working out, being very sharp at certain times, also hormone things. So there's that, meditation. But then I think in men also there's like the bigger life cycles. Like you were saying, you went, and you did the kind of the monastic life, and then you came out of monastic life, and now you're doing a whole other situation. And then probably there will be a moment in your life where it might get a little bit more monastic again, or contemplative. Let's not say monastic, but a little bit more, about contemplation and meditation again. Those cycles happen, and they are also connected to hormone cycles. At certain points, when the hormones come or go, we have different orientations. And I think that definitely happens.
That's really powerful. Thank you. The other question I had is, again, it's somewhat connected to our topic of loss. It is, I get a lot of calls from mostly women, I would say, who tell me about how much they love their partner, but there is no physical intimacy. And they're really torn because at one level, they're like, I love this person. There are many good things about this person. It's not that he's a bad person. But over the years, there's either just no physical intimacy or it's very low and it's not very fulfilling. And then they're like, okay, should I deny this part of myself? Should I just suppress this part of myself? What should I do? Should I explore it with somebody else in secret? So this is a question that I've got not once but many, many times. And I have a sense that this is something that's happening not only to the people who talk to me, but very generally. So I'd love your insight.
Yeah, well, there's so many layers to this, and you've just touched on a few of them, right? There is the romantic notion that we have that the person who we love, the prince on the horse or whatever, right? I mean, whatever version of that, the god taking the goddess into the forest or whatever, right? So there is that whole fairy tale or myth of being claimed, taken somewhere, and then, they live happily ever after. Then there's, of course, like you said, we have these both physical but as well emotional desires to connect and have that moment of oneness, or also enjoyment and pleasure and all of those things. And of course, often women are raised to believe that aspect, that sexual aspect, is an important aspect that they have to preserve for the right man. And then, you give it to the right man, and then suddenly he doesn't want it anymore, right? I mean, that there is some real it's such a horrible thing for the mind and the emotion and everything. So there's all of that happening. And then, of course, right, there is also just health and hormone levels that in women, like you were saying, I mean, we have cycles when that whole when the engine isn't oiled, so to speak, or serviced, right, things happen as well. So it's unpleasant every which way around. But here's the interesting thing about this: is kind of my bread and butter, right? This is what I do for a living, essentially. what you're talking about, which is people don't understand that what makes a relationship good is not what makes the sexual attraction good. So often people, when the sexual aspect goes, they think the relationship is over or there's something really horribly wrong. But that's not actually so. So I'll try and explain this as quickly as I can. But essentially, relationship is built on sameness, on common goals, common values, good communication, and collaboration. Right? So the best relationships are relationships where there's resonance, right? Where people get to know each other and they resonate and they agree and they have a common thing that they're doing, right? And so when we first meet someone, we don't know them. And what we immediately do is we try to find that commonality, right? So typically, unless you were assigned a partner, you meet someone and you go, oh, I like this person. And then you start talking and there's like, oh, I also like whatever, sushi or poetry or whatever, right? So you discover sameness. And if the families know each other, you have common friends or you work in the same industry or whatever, all that sameness allows you to align in relationship. And so in a good relationship, your goals, your values, your purpose, your understanding of things are aligned. Now, what causes sexual attraction? I always say there's two things to remember, two phrases that of course only exist in English. Maybe they exist in other languages too. So the first one is birds of a feather stick together. Right?
Yeah.
So people who are the same stick together. Opposites attract. How does that work? Well, opposites attract is what makes sexual attraction good. So what happens is people get to know each other. They start talking, but typically how it goes is they start talking, they find all these common things, they get to know each other, but they have this amazing spark. Why do they have the spark? They're opposites. They don't know each other. They're strangers, so to speak. So they have this great arc of attraction between two poles, right? And so you have one person over here, one person over here, and there's this big arc, this electric, amazing thing. Every moment, even their fingertips touch. It's like the spark, right? That's why they call it keeping the spark alive. And then you get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And then the spark's gone. Now you have this beautiful, harmonious relationship, but you're not attracted anymore. And so, this is a horrible moment in time, but it's not a death sentence for the intimacy. If you know that all you really need to do is that when you want that kind of sexual spark back, like you were saying, you have to engage in the spanda, right? And people stop doing that. They spend all their time together. They don't have separate interests anymore. They have nothing interesting to tell each other. They don't miss each other. They have rubbed, they're like two magnets that have been rubbed together forever and ever and ever, and they've lost their magnetic charge. And so it's totally possible to rekindle that. And you know how people sometimes go on vacations or things like that, and then they have a bit of that again? Well, that's because it's different. So the real key is that when you want that, you need to make yourself different. How do you make yourself different? Right. You don't do the things that you usually do, right? And then think about what you used to do. Yeah, it's physics. It's not It's not even psychologically. It's just, how do you expect, if you sit next to each other on the sofa every evening, your bodies are touching, you have like some sweatpants on. I don't know how it is in India these days, what people dress in, probably not sweatpants, but you have your house clothes on. And you're sitting there and you're watching TV and you're talking about the neighbor and whatever, right? It's not sexy. It's just not, right? So why would you expect that then suddenly out of that complaining and talking about, the kid who didn't do the homework or whatever, that spark would build? It wouldn't, right? There is no, they're the same, right? They talk the same, they walk the same, they eat the same stuff, they do the same stuff, they talk about the same stuff. And so all you really got to do is pull it apart. And pulling it apart means you do the things you used to do when you first had that spark. Go somewhere in separate modes of transportation, meet there, and do something different, right? Don't go to the same restaurant that you always go to. Don't go to the same park, go to a different park, drive a different road. And when you get there, don't talk about the same stuff you talk about at home. Right? And then suddenly,
very fascinating.
Yeah, imagine you go somewhere and you meet your partner and your partner tells you something that they read that you never heard them talk about. How interesting would that be? Right? How exciting would it be to go
It's so
somewhere?
true that, because when you've been with someone long enough, the moment they start talking, it's like, I know what he's going to say. And the same old story, same old thing. So it's so powerful what you're saying.
It takes some discipline, but if you love someone, you will do it, right? So,
for those who want to really become students of this, do you recommend that they look at your website? What do you recommend for them? Moving forward?
Well, in the book, there's actually a whole chapter on this where I give specific practices.
Right.
So that's a quick and easy way to get some things. I also have lots and lots of free, where I do teaching. We do these podcasts where it's just excerpts of me teaching couples. So that's an option if somebody just wants and doesn't want to dive that deep in. I also have specific courses around that that are like instant access courses. So there's lots of stuff that's there if people want to dive into it, because this is really one of the things, I have to work with, because like you said, you get lots of calls, I get lots of calls. I think everybody else gets lots of calls because it's the most painful thing, because we want that. We want to be seen as new. We want to be listened to as special, right? And when that goes, it's a huge loss and a huge grief. And then people do stupid things that, ruin their lives when really they could just learn a few simple skills and it would make a difference.
You reminded me, as I was listening to you earlier, this quote by Rumi came up. More than once it came up. Rumi says, love is going to burn you. Love is going to burn you. And that's not a problem. The problem is you burn incompletely.
Ah, yes, might as well burn completely, right?
And then rebuild the house with all the animals.
Yes.
Michaela, we can't thank you enough for sharing these powerful stories with us. We've all gained from your wisdom today. If any of you would like to learn more about Michaela's work, which I highly recommend, then do visit michaelaboehm.com. That's michaelaboehm.com. Thank you all for listening. Tune in next week for a brand new episode of Stories We Tell. Don't forget to rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're looking for new ways to explore conscious living, then please subscribe and join me on the Round Glass Living app. In addition to this podcast, you'll find courses, classes, recipes, music, and more to help you make positive changes while doing what you love. Until next time, I'm Nithya Shanti. Goodbye.
The Stories We Tell is a part of Round Glass. Holistic well-being at your fingertips. Find out more at roundglass.com.